It's called Children of the Great Light. And the purpose of the book is to teach healthy spiritual concepts to kids and to their parents. And let me add one other thing, too. At the end of each story, there's a page or two called Notes for the Reader. And so that's, if it's the parent or the guardian or whatever, it's just some notes to kind of explain a little bit about what the story was about or the basis for the story.
Hey, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. Another great author on here with us today. It's a joy as a podcast host to meet great authors from around the world and have them here on the podcast, and today's another example of that. Our guest today is a children's author with a new book coming out, and Wayne McDaniel is here on the podcast, and happy to have Wayne here on the show to talk about his new project. Wayne, welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So we have a friend in common, a mutual contact, some gentleman named Dom something. How did you get in contact with our good friend Dominic Domesky?
Well, I had a friend, Paul Gray, who wrote some books. Did you interview Paul?
Paul was on my podcast. He was a sweetheart of a man. Paul has left a big gap in this world. Thank you for mentioning him. Yes.
Yes, I've known him for several years. And so when I told Paul that I'd written a book and I needed a publisher, or I needed to figure out how to publish it, he put me in contact with Dominique.
And there it is, right from day one. You have found a man whose heart is bigger than his Jeep. He is just a superstar, and I'm so glad that we make a connection through Dom. You're in good hands, so I completely endorse that guy. He's a great man. You're in good hands, so great stuff. So let's talk about where you are. Where do we find you today in this great big world of ours?
So I am in Lawrence, Kansas, which is also where Paul Gray lived, and so that's how I got to know him. And so I'm, in the basically middle of the country.
Nice. And tell me a little bit more about your relationship with Paul. He was on earlier on one of my podcasts. He was one of my early guests, and I walked away from my time with Paul Gray. I walked away a better person as a host by having him on my show.
Yeah.
When I think about Paul Gray, I think of a man who didn't just speak the words that he believed, but he lived them as well, and that was the big difference. Mm-hmm. How Paul Gray took care of people in need. He just lived his faith and demonstrated by his actions. He's a gentleman beyond gentlemen. What is your connection then with Paul?
Yeah, Paul's got a great heart. I'm not exactly sure how I met him because it's like 30 years ago or something. And for a while we had kind of a business relationship, and that was actually before he became a pastor. And then we just kind of, our paths just crossed off and on over the years. And then as I was kind of having a crisis in faith, more or less a few years ago, I connected with him in some conversations, and we just kind of began to grow in a relationship for the past few years.
Nice. And for those listening, Paul was on early on in the podcast, Living the Next Chapter. And sadly, he's no longer with us. But what I love about podcasting is you get to interact with great people and capture a moment in time that we can share even after we lose someone special in this world. We still have a moment of time and their voice that we can go back to and listen to. So it's great. And now to have you on the podcast and to talk about legacy as far as what you're working on and what you're sharing with the world, it's great to have you here. So as an author, where did your author journey begin then?
Well, for years, I've had various ideas about books in my head, and I've written the first chapter or two of a few books, but that's about as far as I got. I actually did write one book, but I never got it published, and I may yet decide to publish it. This was several years ago. But I actually did write one book, but I never got it published, and I may yet decide to publish it. This was several years ago. 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 This was several years ago And so my career was as a financial planner, though, and I retired from that about 7 years ago, and so I've been doing various things and a little bit of writing. Anyhow, I decided a couple years ago, okay, I need to get serious about writing and really actually get a book published. And all of my interests have been along spiritual and theological lines. And I was driving home from St. Louis almost 2 years ago, and I was thinking about one or two of the books that I was wanting to write, and then I thought, how will I ever get shelf space for these books? Because I don't have any theological training. My background is business, and so there's a ton of books out there, and so I was just kind of wondering about that. And then as you're driving along, your mind wanders from one subject to the next, and so I kind of left that subject and was thinking about my grandkids who live in Seattle, and just thinking about them, and then the two thoughts kind of crossed each other. And I thought, well, what if I wrote books for kids, or wrote a book for kids that communicated some of the spiritual concepts that I'd like to communicate? And so that's kind of where I got on the current trajectory.
Amazing. And the one thing that I'm picking on is your thoughts around a crowded space, a little bit of leaning towards imposter syndrome and in the fact that who's going to read my book. I deal with that in podcasting in a podcast sense, where people are having the same feelings that you're saying. Who would listen to my show? Who am I to speak about this topic in such a crowded area full of experts? There are others with more training than I have. Like, why am I here? And you kind of wrestled through that. So what was that point when you were like, that I do have something to say? And what was that connection? Was it writing the children's book? Was that part of it? Was that the thing that gave you the confidence to move forward as an author? Well,
as I was driving my car, and after this concept came to me of writing a children's book, actually, the first story came to me as I was driving the car, and I basically wrote it in my head while I was driving. And I knew that there was going to be 3 stories. It's going to be a trilogy. And so the first one came to me, and when I got home, I typed it out on my computer. And so that's how it got started. But I had no idea what the next 2 were going to be. But I knew one thing, that they were all going to be published at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like, that's a daunting task right there, to know that you have one piece of the puzzle, but there's 2 pieces missing. That would be unnerving for me. I'd be thinking, when are these next 2 parts coming? Because the first part seemed relatively simple in how you received it. But now, what do we wait now? Like, what do we do? What was that process like while you were kind of waiting for the next part to come to you? What did you do?
Well, it wasn't really, I wouldn't call it unnerving. It's kind of like, okay, well, what should the next story be about? And, just kind of pondered it a little bit, but nothing really came to my mind right away. But 2 or 3 weeks later, I was in my car again, and the second story came to me the same way. It's kind of like, oh, yeah, this was, and I wrote the whole story while I was in my head, while I was driving. And when I was able to, I got back to my computer and typed out the second story. And so that's how it came.
So driving in your car is the perfect place to write a book. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I should go on long road trips. Maybe I could write novels that way.
Wow. Like, if I'm driving in the car and an idea comes to me, if I don't deal with that right away, the idea or parts of the idea are going to disappear. In the process of getting to the point where I can write, everything was there for you when you sat down to write? You had clarity when you began to write it out?
Yeah, I was fine. Of course, these are children's stories, so they're relatively short and not very complicated plots.
Nice. So take us through the first in the trilogy. What was the general theme? What did you write about? And what can we expect as a reader?
Yeah, okay. Well, actually, we haven't even said what the title of the book is. It's called Children of the Great Light. And the purpose of the book is to teach healthy spiritual concepts to kids and to their parents. And so I'm sorry, I forgot what your question was now.
Yeah, so what's in the series, what's in the trilogy, and what's the first part about?
Yeah, so the first book, or the first story of the trilogy, it's called Beginnings, and it just kind of sets the foundation of where did we come from, but one thing I want to say is I've written, let me tell you who the audience of my book is, okay? It's really for parents of young children who the parents, maybe they used to go to church, but they don't anymore. And now they got young kids and they're thinking, well, we probably ought to teach them something about God, but I don't even know what I believe anymore, and so I've written this book I don't even use the word God in it. And it is, I use no dogma or religious language. It's just to teach some concepts. So the first concept is that we came from the great light and we're children of the light and the light lives within us. So the first book, Beginnings, kind of sets the stage of that.
Nice. Okay, yeah. That's nice. And I like that you have that you're open to different readers and you don't have it just directed to one certain group. The one part, though, when you write a children's book, it's not just words, there's images, there's artwork. From your perspective, how did you envision that playing out? And how did you find someone to help you with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I knew I wanted it to be colorful and lively and all of that. And so what I did, well, first of all, I put out on Facebook, I'm looking for an illustrator. And so several people contacted me and said, hey, I might be interested, or I know somebody. And so I contacted some of those people and went down the road a little bit with a couple of them, but their illustration style didn't quite seem to fit what I was looking for. And so I began to look at other avenues to find an illustrator. And ultimately I found one also through Facebook, through a Facebook group of children's book illustrators. And so in that group, different members of it would post samples of things that they illustrated. And there was one in particular that I thought I really like how she illustrates. And so I contacted her. Her name is Iceland, and she's in Mexico City. So we contacted, did a Zoom call, talked to each other. I also wanted somebody who resonated with the message of the book, so it wasn't just a job. It was like, yes, I like the message here and I want to help get it out.
So tell me more about that Facebook group. Was that
right?
Was that something that you had planned to find an illustrator at the beginning of the writing process or near the end of the writing process? At what point did you decide that you needed someone to work with to illustrate? Okay. Right. So you had some kind of vision of what this looked like. Was that hard to explain to an illustrator then?
It was after I wrote the book. Yeah. Then I don't think it was too hard because she already had the general style. I did point her to a couple, to some illustrations that I thought, that somebody else had done. Said, something along I like what you do, but here's some other examples of, I also like these. And so, she caught on very quickly to what the theme was and how to do it.
Okay, so the first part of the trilogy is put together. Now, how did the other two parts of the trilogy kind of unfold, and how did that kind of happen to bring all three together?
Yeah, so the second book or second story, they're all in one book. So it's a trilogy in one book. The second one is called Light of the World, and it's about how each of the children of the light, they have gifts, and those gifts make them special. And the way they let their light shine is by sharing their gifts with the world. And there's kind of a story that goes along with that. And there's kind of a twist where, well, this one little light didn't want to share his gifts with the world, and he just wanted to kind of keep them to himself. And so his light got dimmer and dimmer. And then, another light came along and befriended him and started to bring that out. And so it's kind of a story of transformation also, and also of compassion and love and sharing. It's probably my favorite of the three.
I love it. Okay, so was the third story also written in the car as well? Well, okay, there.
It was.
Okay, of course.
So after the second story, I still didn't know what the third one was going to be about. I mean, I did not even have a clue. And then again, I don't know if it was 2, 3, 4 weeks later, once again, I'm driving in the car someplace, and this idea comes to my mind, and I write the whole story in my head once again as I'm driving the car. And once I am able to get back to my computer, I type it down, and there it is.
Okay, so give us a little insight. We're not going to give it all away because we want to buy the book, obviously.
Right.
But what can you tell us about the third part of the story?
So the third story is called Always With You. And it's about that, the light is within us, and it'll never leave us. No matter how dark things get or how scared we get or lonely, we're never alone. The light is always there. So that's the essential message of the third story.
What is the age group that you're focused in on for these three stories?
I wrote it for age 3. It's probably 3 to 4 in that range there. I think they have to be old enough that they can kind of grasp concepts a little bit. But they're simple stories. And so I think, so that's the age group I wrote it for. And let me add one other thing too. At the end of each story, there's, a page or two called Notes for the Reader. And so that's, if it's the parent or the guardian or whatever, it's just some notes to kind of explain a little bit about what the story was about, or the basis for the story.
And that's a nice thing too, because even though you're writing for a younger audience and demographic for your book, you know that the parents are reading it to their children. So they're hearing their own words as they read it to them. And when a child loves a book, they want to hear it over and over and over. So you have a captive audience with the adults as well. That gives you the opportunity to help the adults while they're reading to their children. They're both getting the same message, which helps everybody. I love that.
Everybody, regardless of age, we need to know that we have the light, that the light loves us, that we're never separated or lost totally, that we can come back, so it's a message that's universal regardless of age or circumstance.
What have you learned about yourself in the process of writing this? How do you see things now that you're on this side of the writing process for your book?
Well, it's a great question. What have I learned about myself? I think that since it never occurred to me to write a children's book before. And what I saw is that, well, I can do that. I can do that. And And also that, I'd say the message speaks to me as well. I need to hear that too. I need to be reminded of the same message. And so um, I guess that's kind of what I've learned.
It's interesting because the things that we're looking for in life that we can't find, sometimes that's for us to create because we can't find it. Well, you're creating something that benefits you as an author at the same time that you're helping someone else, children and parents. And I love that.
Yeah, I think it kind of helped me clarify what I think the most important and core spiritual values are for me.
That's great. Amazing. So what is the status of the book? Is the book out right now? What's the status of the book?
So it's hopefully within 2 weeks it will be published and available.
Wow. And then as in regards to the distribution with Dominic and all of his great help, where is this book going to be available to everyone?
Well, we'll have a website, which one could, actually, I don't know if we'll order it through the website or just through Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Apple Books. It'll be on all of those platforms also.
Okay, great. Yeah. And we will have links in the show notes so everyone can follow up and have links to the book as it comes out. That's great. And so talk a little bit about working with someone like Dom and what that is like for you as an author. Talk a little bit more about the services that Dom offered to you as a new author. For a new author listening, right. We only know what we know, but then there's these experts who do this all the time. What are the benefits of working with somebody like Dominic from your perspective? He's
been great. I thought about self-publishing all on my own, but then I thought, I got to learn all of this. And I don't know the ins and outs. I've never published anything. And so I consider Dominique to be kind of a cross between a full publishing and self-publishing. And so he's helping me navigate the waters to get all this set up so that it can be marketed successfully. And so he's been invaluable. He's given me lots of ideas, lots of good feedback. He's building the website. So I just really appreciate all he's doing for me.
Yeah, it's amazing when you have somebody with that skill set, so that you can focus on your craft, you can focus on your book, and he can help you in the other areas. Because again, it can be a little overwhelming for a new author to not only produce the content, work with an illustrator. Now I need a website. Now I have to go on podcasts to talk about my book. I have to do all these things. But all I want to do is just drive my car and write my next story. And that's what I want to do. So it's nice to bring people around you who can support you, to have that support in other areas so that you can just focus on what you do best as an author.
Yeah. And he's been perfect for that. Paul Gray referred me to him, and I appreciate both of them for what they've done.
Amazing. So are there new ideas coming to you still while you're out there driving around and doing your thing? Are there still new ideas coming to you as you commute?
Well, I got a couple ideas, but nothing that's come to fruition yet. I still have a couple of adult books that I might write, but I do think so. My grandchildren are 4 and 2 right now. So I kind of wrote it for their current age, and I have some ideas to kind of follow along the same theme, but for slightly older kids. And so maybe as my grandkids get older, I'll continue to write some children's books for slightly older ages. We'll see.
You have your own captive audience there, a nice target audience that you can write to. You can write and speak to your target audience. They're right there with you. That's great. That's amazing.
Yeah, if nothing else, I'll have 2 kids that will hear my books.
I love it. It's great. Any other thoughts, any other suggestions for new authors from your perspective as a new author? You've worked through the process. You've got some great resources, some great people around you helping you. We have new authors listening to our conversation today, and they have a great idea. They haven't started yet. They need some motivation to get started. And from your perspective, we'd love to kind of get your insight. What would you say to a new author to encourage them to get their story out there into the world?
Well, I guess, the biggest thing for me is working with Dominique, because he has just helped me so much. He had a an editor and proofreader, and he, he's walking me through the whole process, and I think when I'm all done, I could probably do it on my own next time around. I probably won't, because he's been so valuable. I suppose if one wanted to really work at it and learn how to self-publish, they could. I just didn't want to spend all the hours to try to figure all that out. So I think working with somebody like Dominique is great.
Awesome. Yes. And Dominique's website is motivationchamps.com if you're looking for that. Dominic has been with me here in this podcast from the very beginning through episode, like in the early days, episode 100, 200. I'll have him back for episode 300 as a friend. He's just a great resource for authors. I highly recommend him, especially for a new author looking for some insight. Definitely reach out to Dominic. You will find him to be the sweetest guy who will care for you. And if he can't help you, he'll send you in the right direction. He's an amazing person. Good quality people stand out, and that's Dominic Tomasky for sure.
The other thing I might say is whatever you write, I think it needs to come from the heart, something that's really burning within you, that you're passionate about, that you love, that is meaningful. And that if you do that, then you're coming across with integrity, and your message is, I think it comes across clearly to other people.
And don't be afraid to share your message with the world.
Right.
And in a crowded space with many, many children's books. The thing that's unique about your book is you're the only one who could write this book. It's because it's you as the author. It's your approach to your book. It's your burning desire. It's who you are as an author. What you've lived and what you've experienced, no one can duplicate that. And as each of us have a unique fingerprint, as we look at our hands, as we're listening to this, we are unique. There's no one else like us with these fingerprints. There's no one else who can write what we can write. And to see that you've worked your way into this space and created something unique from your perspective is great.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate your time and interviewing me.
That's great. So the website is being built as we speak. So we'll have links to that as it becomes available. So while the website's being built, in the meantime, how do we reach out to you? Maybe we want you on our podcast as a guest. How do we reach out and get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, Wayne McDaniel. I'm in Lawrence, Kansas, so it's easy. I have another philanthropic consulting business called generousvision.com. And so you can find me there and contact me that way. And soon I'll have the website childrenofthegreatlight.com and also storiesofthelight.com. So, but those aren't quite live yet, but they will be soon.
So we'll make sure we have everything updated in the show notes. So you have all the links that we talk about in the future links. And we'll update them in the future as well. And as I remind everyone listening, as a reader, as a fellow author, when you purchase a book like Wayne's, please leave a great review, a detailed review, 5 stars, all of the great stuff whenever you buy your books online. It does really help our authors to grow their reach and let other people know how amazing their book is. So please consider doing that. Thank you, Wayne, for being part of the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And to you for listening, thank you for being part of the podcast. And Dom, thank you for making this all happen for us today and helping great authors. And to Paul Gray's family, we're thinking of you as we have this conversation, wishing you well as well, in absence of Paul. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being here, Wayne. Everyone take care. Thank you for being part of Living the Next Chapter. Hey, look, we're having such a great time talking to authors around the world. If you are an author and you would like to be on this very show, I would love to talk to you. livingthenextchapter.com, livingthenextchapter.com, livingthenextchapter.com is the best way to get in touch with us. There you'll find our social media and blah, 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 la-di-da, and such. You, author, soon-to-be author, new author, currently writing your book author, published author, we need you here. The seat's empty, microphone set up, we're waiting for you. livingthenextchapter.com. We would love to have you on the podcast. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Yeah, you should be here. We'll see you at livingthenextchapter.com.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.